Tuesday, October 20th, 1942. Dearest Kitty, my hand's still shaking, though it's been 2 hours since we had the scare. I should explain that there are 5 fire extinguishers in the building. The office staff stupidly forgot to warn us that the carpenter, or whatever he's called, was coming to fill the extinguishers. As a result, we didn't bother to be quiet until I heard the sound of hammering on the landing across from the bookcase. I immediately assumed it was the carpenter and went to warn Bep, who was eating lunch, that she couldn't go back downstairs. Father and I stationed ourselves at the door so we could hear when the man had left. After working for about 15 minutes, he laid his hammer and some other tools on our bookcase, or so we thought, and banged on our door. We turned white with fear. Had he heard something, after all, and now wanted to check out this mysterious looking bookcase? It seemed so, since he kept knocking, pulling, pushing, and jerking on it. I was so scared, I nearly fainted at the thought of this total stranger managing to discover our wonderful hiding place. Just when I thought my days were numbered, we heard Mr. Kleiman's voice saying, "Open up, it's me." We opened the door at once. What had happened? The hook fastening the bookcase had gotten stuck, which is why no one had been able to warn us about the carpenter. After the man had left, Mr. Kleiman came to get Bep, but couldn't open the bookcase. I can't tell you how relieved I was. In my imagination, the man I thought was trying to get inside the secret annex had kept growing and growing until he'd become not only a giant, but also the cruelest fascist in the world. Fortunately, everything worked out all right, at least this time. We had lots of fun on Monday. Meep and Jan spent the night with us. Margot and I slept in Father and Mother's room for the night so the geeses could have our beds. The menu was drawn up in their honor, and the meal was delicious. The festivities were briefly interrupted when Father's lamp caused a short circuit and we were suddenly plunged into darkness. What were we to do? We did have fuses, but the fuse box was at the rear of the dark warehouse, which made this a particularly unpleasant job at night. Still, the men ventured forth, and 10 minutes later we were able to put away the candles. I was up early this morning. Jan was already dressed. Since he had to leave at 8:30, he was upstairs eating breakfast by 8. Meep was busy getting dressed, and I found her in her undershirt when I came in. She wears the same kind of long underwear I do when she bicycles. Margot and I threw on our clothes as well and were upstairs earlier than usual. After a pleasant breakfast, Meep headed downstairs. It was pouring outside, and she was glad she didn't have to bicycle to work. Daddy and I made the beds, and afterward I learned 5 irregular French verbs. Quite industrious, don't you think? Margot and Peter were reading in our room, with Mushy curled up beside Margot on the divan. After my irregular French verbs, I joined them and read "The Woods Are Singing for All Eternity." It's quite a beautiful book, but very unusual. I'm almost finished. Next week, it's Bep's turn to spend the night. Yours, Anne. Thursday, October 29th, 1942. My dearest Kitty, I'm very worried. Father's sick. He's covered with spots and has a high temperature. It looks like measles. Just think, we can't even call a doctor. Mother is making him perspire in hopes of sweating out the fever. This morning, Meep told us that the furniture has been removed from the Van Dan's apartment on Zuider and Stellen. We haven't told Mrs. Van D yet. She's been so nervous lately, and we don't feel like hearing her moan and groan again about all the beautiful china and lovely chairs she had to leave behind. We had to abandon most of our nice things too. What's the good of grumbling about it now? Father wants me to start reading books by Hebel and other well-known German writers. I could read German fairly well by now, except that I usually mumble the words instead of reading them silently to myself. But that'll pass. Father has taken the plays of Goethe and Schiller down from the big bookcase and is planning to read to me every evening. We've started off with Don Carlos. Encouraged by Father's good example, Mother pressed her prayer book into my hands. I read a few prayers in German just to be polite. They certainly sound beautiful, but they mean very little to me. Why is she making me act so religious and devout? Tomorrow, we're going to light the stove for the first time. The chimney hasn't been swept in ages, so the room is bound to fill with smoke. Let's hope the thing draws. Yours, Anne. Monday, November 2nd, 1942. Dear Kitty, Bep stayed with us Friday evening. It was fun, but she didn't sleep very well because she had drunk some wine. For the rest, there's nothing special to report. I had an awful headache yesterday, and I went to bed early. Margot's being exasperating again. This morning, I began sorting out an index card file from the office because it had fallen over and gotten all mixed up. Before long, I was going nuts. I asked Margot and Peter to help, but they were too lazy, so I put it away. I'm not crazy enough to do it all by myself. Anne Frank. P.S. I forgot to mention the important news that I'm probably going to get my period soon. I could tell because I keep finding a whitish smear in my underwear, and Mother predicted it would start soon. I can't hardly wait. It's such a momentous event. Too bad I can't use sanitary napkins, but you can't get them anymore. And Mama's tampons can be used only by women who've had a baby. Comment added by Anne on January 22nd, 1944. I wouldn't be able to write that kind of thing anymore. Now that I'm rereading my diary after a year and a half, I'm surprised at my childish innocence. Deep down, I know I can never be that innocent again, however much I would like to be. I can understand the mood changes and the comments about Margot, mother, and father as if I had written them only yesterday. But I can't imagine writing so openly about other matters. It embarrasses me greatly to read the pages dealing with subjects that I remembered as being nicer than they actually were. My descriptions are so indelicate, but enough of that. I can also understand my homesickness and yearning for Morch. The whole time I've been here, I've longed unconsciously and at times consciously for trust, love, and physical affection. This longing may change in intensity, but it's always there. Thursday, November 5th, 1942. Dear Kitty, the British have finally scored a few successes in Africa, and Stalingrad hasn't fallen yet. So the men are happy, and we had coffee and tea this morning. For the rest, nothing special to report. This week I've been reading a lot and doing little work. That's the way things ought to be. That's surely the road to success. Mother and I are getting along better lately, but we're never close. Father's not very open about his feelings, but he's the same sweetheart he's always been. We lit the stove a few days ago, and the entire room is still filled with smoke. I prefer central heating, and I'm probably not the only one. Margot's a stinker, there's no other word for it, a constant source of irritation, morning, noon, and night. Anne Frank. Saturday, November 7th, 1942. Dearest Kitty, Mother's nerves are very much on edge, and that doesn't bode well for me. Is it just a coincidence that Father and Mother never scold Margot and always blame me for everything? Last night, for example, Margot was reading a book with beautiful illustrations. She got up and put the book aside for later. I wasn't doing anything, so I picked it up and began looking at the pictures. Margot came back and saw her book in my hands, knitted her brow, and angrily demanded the book back. I wanted to look through it some more. Margot got madder by the minute, and Mother butted in. Margot was reading that book. Give it back to her. Father came in, and without even knowing what was going on, saw that Margot was being wronged and lashed out at me. I'd like to see what you would do if Margot was looking at one of your books. I promptly gave in, put the book down, and, according to them, left the room in a huff. I was neither huffy nor cross, but merely sad. It wasn't right of Father to pass judgment without knowing what the issue was. I would have given the book to Margot myself, and a lot sooner, if Father and Mother hadn't intervened and rushed to take Margot's part, as if she were suffering some great injustice. Of course, Mother took Margot's side. They always take each other's sides. I'm so used to it that I've become completely indifferent to Mother's rebukes and Margot's moodiness. I love them, but only because they're Mother and Margot. I don't give a darn about them as people. As far as I'm concerned, they can go jump in a lake. It's different with father. When I see him being partial to Margot, approving Margot's every action, praising her, hugging her, I feel a gnawing ache inside because I'm crazy about him. I model myself after father, and there's no one in the world I love more. He doesn't realize that he treats Margot differently than he does me. Margot just happens to be the smartest, the kindest, the prettiest, and the best. But I have a right to be taken seriously too. I've always been the clown and mischief maker of the family. I've always had to pay double for my sins, once with scoldings and then again with my own sense of despair. I'm no longer satisfied with the meaningless affection or the supposedly serious talks. I long for something from father that he's incapable of giving. I'm not jealous of Margot. I never have been. I'm not envious of her brains or her beauty. It's just that I would like to feel that father really loves me, not because I'm his child, but because I'm me. Anne. I cling to father because my contempt of mother is growing daily, and it's only through him that I'm able to retain the last ounce of family feeling I have left. He doesn't understand that I sometimes need to vent my feelings for mother. He doesn't want to talk about it, and he avoids any discussion involving mother's failings. And yet mother, with all her shortcomings, is tougher for me to deal with. I don't know how I should act. I can't very well confront her with her carelessness, her sarcasm, and her hard-heartedness. Yet I can't continue to take the blame for everything. I'm the opposite of mother, so of course we clash. I don't mean to judge her. I don't have that right. I'm simply looking at her as a mother. She's not a mother to me. I have to mother myself. I've cut myself adrift from them. I'm charting my own course, and we'll see where it leads me. I have no choice, because I can picture what a mother and a wife should be, and can't seem to find anything of the sort in the woman I'm supposed to call mother. I tell myself time and again to overlook mother's bad example. I only want to see her good points, and to look inside myself for what's lacking in her. But it doesn't work, and the worst part is that father and mother don't realize their own inadequacies and how much I blame them for letting me down. Are there any parents who can make their children completely happy? Sometimes I think God is trying to test me, both now and in the future. I'll have to become a good person on my own, without anyone to serve as a model or advise me, but it'll make me stronger in the end. Who else but me is ever going to read these letters? Who else but me can I turn to for comfort? I'm frequently in need of consolation. I often feel weak, and more often than not, I fail to meet expectations. I know this, and every day I resolve to do better. They are consistent in their treatment of me. One day they say that Anne's a sensible girl and entitled to know everything, and the next that Anne's a silly goose who doesn't know a thing and yet imagines she's learned all she needs to know from books. I'm no longer the baby and spoiled little darling whose every deed can be laughed at. I have my own ideas, plans, and ideals, but am unable to articulate them yet. Oh well. So much comes into my head at night when I'm alone, or during the day when I'm obliged to put up with people I can't abide or who invariably misinterpret my intentions. That's why I always wind up coming back to my diary. I start there and end there, because Kitty's always patient. I promise her that, despite everything, I'll keep going, that I'll find my own way and choke back my tears. I only wish I could see some results, or just once, receive encouragement from someone who loves me. Don't condemn me, but think of me as a person who sometimes reaches the bursting point. Yours, Anne. Monday, November 9th, 1942. Dearest Kitty, yesterday was Peter's birthday, his 16th. I was upstairs by 8, and Peter and I looked at his presents. He received a game of Monopoly, a razor, and a cigarette lighter. Not that he smokes so much, not at all. It just looks so distinguished. The biggest surprise came from Mr. Van Daan, who reported at 1 that the English had landed in Tunis, Algeria, Casablanca, and Iran. This is the beginning of the end, everyone was saying. But Churchill, the British Prime Minister, who must have heard the same thing being repeated in England, declared, "This is not the end. It is not even the beginning of the end, but it is perhaps the end of the beginning." Do you see the difference? However, there's a reason for optimism. Stalingrad, the Russian city that has been under attack for 3 months, still hasn't fallen into German hands. In the true spirit of the annex, I should talk to you about food. I should explain that they're real gluttons up on the top floor. Bread is delivered daily by a very nice baker, a friend of Mr. Kleiman's. Of course, we don't have as much as we did at home, but it's enough. We also purchase ration books on the black market. The price keeps going up. It's already risen from 27 to 33 guilders, and that for mere sheets of printed paper. To provide ourselves with a source of nutrition that will keep, aside from the 100 cans of food we've stored here, we bought 300 pounds of beans, not just for us, but for the office staff as well. We had hung the sacks of beans on hooks in the hallway, just inside our secret entrance, but a few seams split under the weight, so we decided to move them to the attic, and Peter was entrusted with the heavy lifting. He managed to get 5 of the 6 sacks upstairs intact and was very busy with the last one when the sack broke and a flood, or rather a hailstorm, of brown beans went flying through the air and down the stairs. Since there were about 50 pounds of beans in that sack, it made enough noise to raise the dead. Downstairs, they were sure the house was falling down around their heads. Peter was stunned, but then burst into peals of laughter when he saw me standing at the bottom of the stairs like an island in a sea of brown, with waves of beans lapping at my ankles. We promptly began picking them up, but beans are so small and slippery that they roll into every conceivable corner and hole. Now each time we go upstairs, we bend over and hunt around so we can present Mrs. Van Daan with a handful of beans. I almost forgot to mention that Father has recovered from his illness. The radio has just announced that Algiers has fallen. Morocco, Casablanca, and Iran have been in English hands for several days. We're now waiting for Tunis. Yours, Anne. Tuesday, November 10th, 1942. Dearest Kitty, great news. We're planning to take an 8th person into hiding with us. Yes, really. We always thought there was enough room and food for one more person, but we were afraid of placing an even greater burden on Mr. Kugler and Mr. Kleiman. But since reports of the dreadful things being done to the Jews are getting worse by the day, Father decided to sound out these 2 gentlemen, and they thought it was an excellent plan. It's just as dangerous, whether there are 7 or 8, they noted rightly. Once this was settled, we sat down and mentally went through our circle of acquaintances, trying to come up with a single person who would blend in well with our extended family. This wasn't difficult, and after Father had rejected all the Van Daan relatives, we chose a dentist named Albert Dussel. He lives with a charming Christian lady who's quite a bit younger than he is. They're probably not married, but that's besides the point. He's known to be quiet and refined, and he seemed, from our superficial acquaintance with him, to be nice. Meep knows him as well, so she'll be able to make the necessary arrangements if he comes. Mr. Dussel will have to sleep in my room instead of Margot, who will have to make do with the folding bed. We'll ask him to bring along something to fill cavities with. And after Dussel arrived, Margot slept in her parents' bedroom. Yours, Anne.